Hello and good morning, good afternoon, or good evening, depending on when you're accessing this video. My name is Matthew McCarg, and this is my learning module on constructivism in education. So I want to start off by just very briefly talking about the origins of the constructivist philosophy. Many people would consider Jerome Bruner to be the father of constructivism for his contributions in the field of cognitive and educational psychology. John Dewey was considered to be a radical educational reformist in his time for his thoughts about the social construction of knowledge and the value of social interaction in the learning process. And then you have Jean Piaget and Lev Vygotsky, which kind of took both of those concepts created by Bruner and Dewey and built upon them. So you really have Bruner and Piaget that are both in the cognitive domain, and then you've got Dewey and Vygotsky, which are both subscribers to the idea that knowledge is more socially constructed and that students learn best when they are interacting with their peers. So when you take these two knowledge bases and merge them together with the idea of students learn best in a social setting interacting with their peers, and that there must be some sort of dissonance, which is when an individual comes in contact with some information that causes their existing schemas to be in conflict with the way that they've made meaning of the world, and then they go through this process of either assimilating or accommodating their current schemas until we get back to a state of equilibrium. So it's the intersection of these two concepts from which constructivism emerges. So constructivism in the classroom manifests itself in the form of students progressing through these stages of dissonance, assimilation, accommodation, and equilibrium while interacting socially with their peers. And these are some of the common characteristics and instructional strategies that you'll see in a constructivist classroom. The probably most important factor in a constructivist classroom is that it is student-centered and the teacher acts as a facilitator. So instead of having the teacher as the authority who has all the right answers and holds all the knowledge, we are focused on the learner and the students. And the teacher acts as a guide and a facilitator instead of a disseminator of knowledge. So scaffolding is a direct derivation of the theory of the zone of proximal development by Vygotsky, where we slowly remove support structures until a student is able to complete tasks completely independently. The Socratic method is a form of purposeful questioning, most of the time open-ended questions. These questions need to be well thought out beforehand, and you need to assume misconceptions and ask questions in such a way that you're going to lead students where you want them to go and lead them into a productive struggle with the content. And so what you have as a result of these instructional methods in a student-centered environment is most of the time you're going to have formative assessment, which takes the form of observations and things of that nature, and you're going to need to provide frequent and meaningful feedback as the students progress through these stages while they're struggling with the content so that the construction of knowledge can continue. So when we look at comparing the traditional versus the constructivist classroom, again, the first thing we want to mention is that the focus here is on the learner. The students are going to work in pairs or in some sort of groups. The learner is constructing their knowledge either cognitively or socially or as a combination of both. The curriculum can change and is sometimes subject to the rate of development of the student. And then assessment is going to look much different. In the constructivist classroom, you have more formative assessments, which is going to be observations and anecdotal evidence, and your student artifacts are going to be more in the form of portfolios and things of that nature rather than an exam, which is the more traditional type standardized summative assessment. So the benefits of the constructivist classroom, just think about a time that you created something on your own and you had to struggle through it, and the pride that you felt when you got done with your finished product, whether it was, something that was actually really good or not. You struggled through it and you created this thing, and so you took pride in it. And so that's what happens with the constructivist classroom, is that the students take ownership of their knowledge, and that plays a long way into motivating them and keeping them engaged. They learn how they learn best. They learn how to learn, which is possibly one of the most important things that you can teach them. It encourages creativity and inquiry. It exposes them to different and oftentimes conflicting perspectives from what they have from being interacting with their peers and with their teacher on a more regular basis. And as a natural consequence of that, you're going to have social and communication skills that are going to be advanced. So some criticism of the constructive philosophy is this idea of groupthink, that is, one person or one perspective within a group is going to dominate the conclusions that group draws, and thus affect the learning that takes place within that group of people. There's also a lack of empirical evidence that the constructivist philosophy is a superior teaching method, which has to do with the type of assessment that takes place in a constructivist classroom and the type of artifacts that you get from that. They are more subjective and more formative in nature, which is harder to draw empirical data on. So in higher education, your implications are that the constructivist philosophy is really taken over. If you look at the literature in teaching and learning right now in higher education, project-based and problem-based learning, student-centered learning, active learning, all of these things are going to dominate the literature that you'll see right now on teaching and learning in higher education, and all of them are based in the constructivist philosophy that we are centered on the learner, we are allowing learners to struggle with content, the teachers act as facilitators, and the students are constructing their own meaning-making structures.